guess I should start by introducing the kind of dyno I have. It is a DC7500. It's an 84-inch roll. Over the years they were produced. The inertia of the rolls varied from about 70 kg meter squared to about 103. Look at that rust. This one is 106 because they love me more than they love everybody else. It has an eddy brake. There's not a whole ton of point these days in buying a dyno that doesn't have an eddy brake, so you can have load control, do steady state operation, and add more load to the cars when they make a lot of power. That's the model dyno itself, and kind of unpack everything that comes with the dyno when they ship. If I had the box, that would be way cooler. I don't have the box. I mean, I do. It's inside. So we're just going to do it this way. When you get your Dynocom dynamometer, when you get the dyno, it's going to come with a bunch of boxes and little toys and things to play with. It's kind of good to know how they all hook up. Everything only plugs in one way. I don't even know how my drawers are organized right now. We'll start with the basic stuff, like the bare minimum you need to actually operate the machine. So this is, as Dynocom calls it, I'm going to call them by the names Dynocom gives them, because when you call in, if you have to call customer support, they're going to use those names and it's going to be helpful to you. So this is the DC handheld. This is how you operate the dyno from inside the vehicle. It's pretty straightforward. You can do a ton of stuff with this thing, and older guys with older dynos, if your diaphragm's dead, I highly recommend figuring that out, because you can do a lot of cool stuff with these. This is referred to as the DC controller. The DC controller is your communication between the handheld and the J-box, or the dyno itself, and between the PC and the dyno itself. That's your physical connection to this device down here on the side of the dyno, which they refer to as the J-box. See if that'll actually focus. I don't have a ton of options. There's no adjustable track width or all-wheel drive or anything fancy like that on this dyno. So all you have here is you have the pulse width modulation for the eddy brake. On the other side, you have the speed sensor and the brake. Those are the only three plugs on mine, and then this goes to the power absorption unit itself. So both of these are for the eddy brake. You have a DB25 cable that plugs into the bottom. Your DB25 cable is your physical connection to the DC controller. So come back over here and jam that in there. I don't have a ton of hands, so I might have to hold the camera in my mouth to do this. It just plugs into the back. Guys with hub dynos, you're going to have two of these. You see how they're labeled 1 and 2. You have a primary and a secondary. Your secondary is number 2, your primary is number 1. That should be fairly self-explanatory. The other things you see in the back of this right now, I have my 12-volt power supply going into this. I have a USB going to the PC, and this is the weather station. The little phone cable looking jobber there is the weather station. Keep your weather stations plugged in. That's how your dyno adjusts for ambient conditions, for the temperature and your DA, all that fun stuff. I just have mine mounted to the back of my dirty bird dirty box because reasons. Everything only plugs in one way. You really can't mess up hooking everything together. Even if you see like the RPM input, the AFR, the CPM, all this, you have a certain amount of holes for everything. It only plugs in one way. The AFR will not plug into that. It just physically, you can't plug it in. Starting with the bare minimum, all you really need to run the dyno, if you're not pulling AFRs off the car, plug this in real quick. Plug in the handheld and power on. I have to set the camera down just to plug this in. You can see that. Wow, look, that looks fun. It really doesn't look like that on camera, but that's what it's going to look like. When you first power on, you're going to see the firmware screen comes up. When that screen's on, you're actually displaying your firmware on the DC controller. This is the main screen, the primary screen on the handheld. From here you can navigate the other screens on the handheld. This is your manual PAU screen if you want to manually add eddy brake to the vehicle. You could do it from this screen. Don't leave manual eddy brake added if you're actually making dyno pulls, because it won't account for it in the software unless you add it from the software side, not from the handheld side. Everything you do with the handheld should be put to 0 before you actually use the PC. Just cycle through these screens just so you guys can see them. That's just another manual PAU screen. Anytime you're on a manual PAU screen, you probably can't tell with this camera, but the pixel, that pixel right there pulses all the time. If you press the decimal key on the handheld, it will stop pulsing. That's you zeroing out the load cell from this screen. It will stop pulsing. When it starts pulsing back, the load cell's been zeroed out. So if you have some weird load readings right there, you can zero those out. Going through this other stuff, I'm going to do a whole video on this so you guys can see the weather stations working. It is not warm outside today. PID mode, we're going to spend a lot of time on that, or at least 5 minutes, just so you guys can get some usability out of your dyno, because it never ceases to amaze me how many guys don't use the PID mode on their dyno, or honestly I think it's called mode 1 of operation. Don't quote me on that, it might be mode 2. It's my favorite mode. Cycling through the screens just so you guys can see. There's your firmware version. It's a roller dyno. If you guys have pods, it's going to say pods. Those are all the main screens. There's also a setup menu. I'm going to go specifically over this stuff in another video, so, or even maybe later in this video, I'm not entirely sure, so you guys will see that. Brake. Hey, did you hear that? That's the air brake on the dyno. Only the chassis dynos have a physical air brake. This button does nothing on the hub dynos unless you choose to tell it to. This button is how you start and stop your runs. You cannot stop a run with the stop button. Well, you can. You have to set it up in the software. You can go over all this. We can have a ball of this stuff. There's a ton of stuff you can do with these dynos. And I guess that's what these videos are for, just to get you guys to figure out exactly what you have to do. So, basic operation. This is really all you need to make a dyno pull. If you're just making a power pull, you just have to have your J-box plugged into your DC controller, plugged into your PC, and your handheld. That's it. It's not super complicated. I'm probably going to take my PC home tonight and go over some of the different test types and stuff. I haven't had this particular unit for very long. This is my second purchase from Dynocom, so there's not a whole lot of runs on this PC, but there's enough for us to mess around with and play with. Plus I have a database of a lot of other people's stuff. We'll still want to Kevin Mark Hands dyno runs and go over that. That'll be more interesting. That being said, that's the basic hardware that it comes with. Some of the other considerations, and I'll come back up here and go over the AFR and all that fun stuff in just a minute. For your eddy brake, the dyno ships with the plug for the eddy brake. It's the right plug you need. I don't think my dyno shipped with this Eaton. I probably lost mine and went and bought that. I am only running single phase to this eddy brake. Single phase is on a 30 amp. It's on the same outlet that our welder is, so the other end of my plug looks like that. We're only running 30 amps and 2 legs, so I used 10 gauge wire. You should really use 6 gauge wire. I'm a cheap fuck, so I used 10 gauge, and so far it hasn't let the magic out, so we shall see how that goes. Other basic stuff with my basic bitch setup. I am outside. I'm outside. I'm under an awning. It does not get wet under here unless it rains sideways, and that's very infrequently. All the do as I say, not as I do. When you guys level your dynos, make sure you're on flat ground. All that kind of fun stuff. I'm going to go ahead and show you that I am not on level ground. There. And you can look there. You can look in the corner of the dyno there where it's flat to the ground. And you can look there where it's on a piece of 4-inch pipe stock. Now, the dyno actually ended up being perfectly level. It ended up being perfect where I could use 2-inch pipe and 4-inch pipe and get it done. That being said, it's also shimmed in a bunch of places. You can see one of the pieces right there. It's shimmed basically along every piece of plate that's inside the dyno. And it's shimmed at the bearings, which on this case would be both into this dyno. Guys with a 15,000, you have another bearing here and another bearing here because your eddy brake's in the middle, which is a really cool design. Not sure what that thought was. This is one of those do as I say, not as I do. Put your dyno on level ground. I have my Chinesium Bendapack lift. For the money, it's actually a really good lift. It's ALI certified. The big deciding factor of me buying a Bendapack versus buying something else was it was $5 and I could get it shipped from Alabama and it was here the next day. So that was my logic behind that. Nothing more, nothing less. It's a 9K. 9K is about the minimum I would go. If you guys wanted to do something a little bit heavier duty, I'm here for it. Absolutely, do that. But yeah, a 9K super Chinese man is about the minimum I would go. Also, D-rings for lower horsepower cars, you're fine if you put them in the rack. Have some in the ground. There's some under here for the higher horsepower stuff. I also recommend always leaving shit on top of your above ground kit. If you guys are above ground and you have the rear deck, leave shit on it. If you don't leave your shit on it, it's an open horizontal surface. People will leave their shit on it. This is a busy shop. There's an inside with a bunch of guys in there, and they put their shit here if I don't put my shit here. So that's the thing. Small consideration. Alright, gonna do a quick little pre-dyno checklist rundown type of deal. Well, I set up some other stuff, so I'm gonna have to record myself on the computer later doing polls, which will be fun. But so far as a pre-checklist, I had to go next door and get a loaner car. So I got a car on borrow from next door. So when you shut this down, when you first get the car, guys with an above ground dyno, you're going to be at a slight advantage here. Put the car up on the lift. Go ahead and bring it way higher than you need to, because you're going to come under the car and you're going to check, make sure nothing's wet and nothing looks super nasty. See what kind of exhaust you got on the car. It's a 3-inch collector into a 2.5-inch exhaust, it looks like. No rear O2. No, we'll call that a catalytic converter for the EPA. Some junk on the exhaust. I'm going to come all the way down here. I'm going to check the drive shaft. That's probably fine. Make sure nothing's wet around the diff. And then you can bring the car back down to the level where you're going to actually strap it down to the dyno and everything. So give the car a once over before you guys get it on the dyno, especially above ground guys. This will be easiest for you, but if you guys have an open lift in the shop, I recommend getting the car up high and looking at it before you get on the dyno anyway. So that's that. I'll get the car lowered down to height, and then we'll go over strapping the car on. Most of you guys that have like a solid rear axle, you just go around the axle tubes. Anything where you got an exposed axle like that, lower control arm is going to be your best bet on this particular car. When you use the straps in the back, make sure you use all four. You're going to make an X with the two centers, and you're going to send these little ancillary straps straight in case shit goes sideways. Try not to be touching the exhaust. If you do, DEI makes some nice sleeves that you can put over these, because these max straps are kind of expensive. In the front, you're only going to need straps through the wheels, because this is a 2-wheel drive dyno. All-wheel drive guys, a nice X in the front will go a long way. And remember, all-wheel drive guys, you're going to have to hold the steering wheel. Higher horsepower stuff, I'll usually come from the ground, and then the lower horsepower stuff, I'll just go straight to the deck on this. This thing only makes maybe 500 horsepower, so on the deck of the lift will be fine. Start with the outers a little on the tighter side. You can leave these X's loose. You're gonna have the front wheel chocked and the front straps in. You're just gonna roll the car and let it center itself before you tighten these centers up. Take the brake off. That's enough. Centered up. Now I just tighten the back. You say the magic words, that's not going anywhere. That, ladies and gentlemen, is how to get the car strapped in, and now we're ready for dyno operation.